My sister's billionaire fiancé looked me dead in the eye, smiled at his wealthy French investors, and called me a waste of space in perfect Parisian French. He was absolutely certain I was too uneducated to understand him. He laughed, clinking his champagne glass, and then switched to English to order me around like a servant in front of 100 guests. "Maya, be a dear and fetch us another bottle," he said, smirking. The crowd watched, waiting for the invisible sister to obey. I did not move. I did not apologize. I simply took a sip of my water, looked him up and down, and replied in flawless aristocratic French. I corrected his grammar, exposed his fake accent, and insulted his intelligence without using a single curse word. The room fell dead silent. His face turned pale, but he didn't know that was just the warning shot. The real war was about to begin. "My name is Maya, and I am 32 years old. If you looked at me standing in the corner of that vineyard in Napa Valley, wearing a simple beige dress and comfortable flats, you would probably make the same mistake my family always makes. You would see a quiet, plain woman who works as a glorified secretary. You would see the background character in someone else's movie. My sister Ebony was the star. At 26, she was glowing in a custom designer gown, holding court as the future wife of a tech mogul. Our parents, Desmond and Patrice, were beaming, practically vibrating with the thrill of finally marrying their golden child into serious money. They had spent my entire life reminding me that I was the practical one, the boring one, the one who needed to stay out of the way so Ebony could shine. Before I tell you how I brought this house of cards crashing down, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been underestimated by the people who are supposed to love you the most. The engagement party was an exercise in excess. Julian, my sister's fiancé, had rented out one of the most exclusive vineyards in California. There were ice sculptures, a string quartet playing pop covers, and enough imported flowers to bury a small town. I stood near a pillar holding a glass of sparkling water, watching my parents fawn over Julian. "Oh, Julian, this is magnificent, my mother," Patrice gushed, clutching his arm. "You really have outdone yourself. Our Ebony is so lucky," Julian preened, adjusting his silk tie. "Only the best for my Queen Patrice. Money is no object when it comes to family." I suppressed a sigh. I knew things they didn't. I knew that Julian's tech startup was currently bleeding cash. I knew he had leveraged his assets to fund this lifestyle. But to my family, he was a god. He was the savior who would elevate the family name. "I was just there because it would look bad if the sister didn't show up," Maya Ebony's voice shrilled across the patio. "Come hold my train, I need to take a photo for Instagram." I walked over, keeping my face neutral. I bent down and adjusted the lace of her gown so it cascaded perfectly over the stone steps. "Thanks," Ebony said without looking at me. Her eyes were glued to her phone screen. "Try to stay out of the shot." "Okay. You look a little frumpy today. Did you get that dress at a thrift store?" "It is vintage," I said quietly. Ebony laughed. "Vintage means used. Maya. Whatever. Just go stand over there. Julian is bringing some VIPs over." I moved back to my corner. I watched as Julian approached a group of 3 men who had just arrived. They were impeccably dressed, carrying themselves with the distinct air of old European money. I recognized the man in the center immediately. It was Laurent Delacroix, a venture capitalist from Lyon, whose firm was notorious for eating weak startups alive. Julian led them toward the patio, his chest puffed out. He was speaking French to them. Or rather, he was attempting to speak French. His accent was thick and clumsy, the kind of French learned in a high school classroom and practiced in front of a mirror, not lived. "Messieurs, welcome," Julian said in French, butchering the vowels. "This is the party. My fiancé is over there." Laurent nodded politely, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the room. He looked bored. He looked like a man who was waiting for a reason to leave. Then Julian's eyes landed on me. I was standing close enough to hear them, but far enough away to be ignored. He decided to use me as a prop to assert his dominance. He wanted to show these investors that he was a man of power, a man who had people to serve him. He gestured toward me with a dismissive wave of his hand. Ah, Laurent Julien said in French, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. Do not pay attention to the woman in the corner. That is just my fiancé's sister. Laurent glanced at me. Julien continued, his voice dripping with condescension, still speaking French. She is… how do you say? The help. She is a bit simple in the head. Empty upstairs. We let her come to eat the free food. She has no ambition. Just a sad little life. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just the insult, it was the arrogance. He assumed that because I was black and American and quiet, I couldn't possibly understand a European language. He assumed my silence was ignorance. He didn't know that I had spent the last 10 years working as a high-level trade negotiator. He didn't know I had lived in Paris for 4 years while getting my master's in international law. He didn't know that I spoke 5 languages fluently, and that I was currently a silent shareholder in the very fund Laurent Delacroix represented. Julien turned his attention back to me, switching to English. His tone changed from conspiratorial to commanding. Maya, he barked, snapping his fingers. Be a dear and fetch a fresh bottle of the Cabernet for the gentleman, and get some napkins. Mr. Delacroix spilled a drop. He smiled at Laurent, expecting the investor to be impressed by his command over his domestic staff. The air around me seemed to freeze. My mother was watching from across the patio, nodding encouragingly, wanting me to serve her precious son-in-law. Ebony was busy taking a selfie. I looked at the empty glass in my hand. I looked at Julien's smug, punchable face. I realized I had 2 choices. I could go get the wine and keep the peace as I had done for 32 years, or I could burn the bridge right now and dance in the ashes. I set my glass down on a passing waiter's tray. The sound of the glass hitting the metal was a sharp ding. I took 2 steps forward. I stood directly in front of Julien and his guests. I didn't look at the ground. I looked Laurent Delacroix straight in the eye. Enchanté, Monsieur Delacroix, I said. The words flowed out of me with the crisp, rolling cadence of a native Parisian. My accent was not just good, it was elite. It was the accent of the Sorbonne. Laurent's eyes widened. His jaw dropped slightly. I turned my gaze to Julien. He looked like he had been slapped. His smile froze, then shattered. And Julien I continued, still speaking in French, but raising my voice just enough so the nearby guests could hear the melody of the language, even if they didn't understand the words. Your grammar is atrocious. When you described me as empty, you used the indicative mood. You should have used the subjunctive because that statement reflects your own reality, not mine. Also, your accent sounds like a tourist asking for the bathroom. It is embarrassing. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. The string quartet seemed to stop playing. The guests nearby who had been chatting turned to look. They didn't understand the French, but they understood the tone. They understood the power dynamic had just violently flipped. Laurent Delacroix let out a sudden barking laugh. He looked at me with new respect. Mademoiselle, he said in French, you speak beautifully. I apologize for my associate's rudeness. I smiled at Laurent. It is not your fault, monsieur. Some men mistake money for class. They are rarely right. I turned back to Julien. He was pale. His mouth opened and closed like a fish. He looked at Ebony, then at his investors, realizing he had just been humiliated in front of the money he desperately needed. I switched to English, my voice cool and flat. Get your own wine, Julien. I am here to drink it, not serve it. I turned on my heel and walked away. I could feel 100 pairs of eyes burning into my back. I could hear the sudden frantic whispering breaking out across the patio. My heart was pounding in my chest, not from fear, but from the exhilaration of finally, after all these years, taking the safety off. I didn't look back at my parents who were staring at me with horror. I didn't look back at Ebony, who had lowered her phone. I walked straight to the bar, ordered a glass of the most expensive vintage they had, and took a long, slow sip. But as the liquid courage settled in my stomach, I saw my father marching toward me. His face was purple with rage. Behind him, Julian was regrouping his shock, turning into a dangerous, vindictive anger. I knew this wasn't over. I had just declared war on the Golden Boy. And in my family, you don't attack the Golden Boy without consequences. But for the first time in my life, I was ready to pay the price. Because I knew something they didn't. I held the receipt for everything they owned. The drive back to my parents' estate was suffocating. The silence in the car wasn't peaceful. It was heavy charged with the static of unspoken accusations. My father Desmond gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned ash gray. My mother Patrice stared out the window, refusing to look at me, but I could hear her sharp, angry breaths. In the back seat next to me, Ebony was furiously typing on her phone, likely spinning the narrative of the evening to her thousands of followers before the truth could get out. When we finally walked through the front door of the house, I grew up in the house that had always felt more like a museum than a home. The explosion happened instantly. My mother didn't even wait to take off her coat. She spun around in the foyer, her face twisted in a mixture of embarrassment and rage. "Are you crazy?" Patrice screamed, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "What possessed you to pull a stunt like that? Do you have any idea who those men were?" I stood near the door, clutching my purse. I realized then that she wasn't asking because she wanted an answer. She was asking because she wanted to hurt me. "I defended myself, Mom," I said calmly. "Julian insulted me. He called me stupid in front of his investors. I just let him know I understood him." Patrice scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. "He was joking, Maya. That is just Julian's sense of humor. He is a billionaire. He is under a lot of pressure. He was just breaking the ice and you had to go and humiliate him. And for what? To show off?" She stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. "And where did you learn that little speech anyway? Did you memorize a few lines from an app on your phone, just to make a scene? You think because you can parrot a few words of French you are suddenly better than us?" The accusation hit me harder than a slap. It wasn't just that she didn't believe me. It was that she refused to acknowledge the 10 years of struggle that had defined my life. I looked at my father, hoping for some defense, but Desmond just shook his head. "You embarrassed your sister," Desmond said, his voice deep and disappointed. "This was Ebony's night. You made it about you. That is selfish, Maya. Extremely selfish." I felt a bitter laugh bubbling up in my throat. Selfish? I looked around the foyer. I looked at the expensive art on the walls, the marble floors, the crystal chandelier. Every inch of this house screamed money, but none of it had ever been for me. 10 years ago, I stood in this exact spot with an acceptance letter to a prestigious graduate program in Paris. I had begged my parents for help with the tuition, just a loan. I didn't ask for a gift. I asked for support. I remember Desmond looking at me, then his face impassive, telling me that the family funds were tied up. He said they couldn't afford to send me on a European vacation. 2 weeks later, he bought Ebony a brand new convertible for her 16th birthday because she was upset about a breakup. That was the reality of my life. Ebony got cars. I got rejection. I didn't learn French from an app, Mom. I said, my voice trembling slightly with suppressed emotion. I learned it when I lived in a closet-sized apartment in the 11th arrondissement for 4 years. I learned it when I was working 3 jobs to pay for the master's degree you said was a waste of time. I learned it because I had to survive in a country where I knew no one, because the people who were supposed to support me were too busy buying Ebony designer purses. Ebony looked up from her phone, then rolling her eyes. "Oh my God, here we go again with the martyr act," Ebony groaned. She walked over to the mirror, checking her makeup, completely unbothered by the fact that I was bleeding emotionally in front of her. "You are just jealous," Maya, Ebony said, fixing her lip gloss. "You have always been jealous. You are jealous because Julian chose me. You are jealous because I am getting the fairy tale wedding and you are single and working some boring office job." She turned to face me, a cruel smirk on her face. "Julian told me he was just teasing you. He said he likes to test people's sense of humor. Clearly you failed. Why do you have to be so intense all the time? You ruined the vibe completely. Now I have to do damage control with his friends. I stared at her. The golden child. She genuinely believed the world revolved around her feelings. The fact that her fiancé had called me empty-headed and simple meant nothing to her because it didn't affect her follower count. I am not jealous of you, Ebony, I said quietly. And I am definitely not jealous of a man who needs to belittle women to feel powerful. Patrice gasped. Watch your mouth. Julian is going to be family. He is going to take care of this family. You should be thanking him for even inviting you, not criticizing him. Desmond crossed his arms. You need to apologize, Maya. When Julian gets here, you are going to tell him you were out of line. You are going to tell him you overreacted. We are not losing this connection because of your pride. I looked at my father, realizing with a sinking heart that he saw me as a liability to his retirement plan. He didn't care about my dignity. He cared about Julian's wallet. I opened my mouth to refuse to tell them I would never apologize for defending myself, but the front door swung open. Julian walked in. He didn't look like a man who had just been publicly shamed. He looked energized. He looked arrogant. He strode into the foyer with the confidence of a man who knows the game is rigged in his favor. He had already spun the story in his head, and he knew my parents would buy whatever version he sold them. Julian Patrice cried out, rushing to him. We are so sorry. Maya is just... She is just tired. She didn't mean it. Julian held up a hand, silencing her. He walked past my parents and stood directly in front of me. He looked me up and down, his eyes cold and calculating. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked like he had found a use for a broken tool. He chuckled, shaking his head. You really surprised me tonight, Maya, Julian said, his voice smooth and condescending. I had no idea you were hiding such talents. Aristocratic French. Very impressive. A bit theatrical, but impressive. He didn't apologize. He didn't acknowledge the insult. He treated my defense like a performance art piece he had graciously decided to critique. I stared at him, refusing to look away. I am glad you enjoyed it, Julian. Maybe next time you will check your grammar before you insult someone's intelligence. My father stiffened, ready to yell at me again, but Julian laughed. Feisty, he said. I like that. You know, I was angry at first. You really threw off the rhythm of the meeting. Laurent was quite confused. But then I started thinking. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of documents. They were bound with heavy clips, the paper dense and filled with legal jargon. He tossed the stack onto the foyer table with a loud thud. I have been having trouble with my legal team in Paris, Julian said, loosening his tie. They are slow, and they charge me a fortune for translations that lack nuance. Since you are so fluent, and since you seem to have so much free time to judge me, I figured you could make yourself useful. He tapped the stack of papers. These are the merger documents for the acquisition I am closing next week, along with the prenuptial agreement drafts. They are in French. I need them translated into English by tomorrow morning. He smiled a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Consider it your way of making amends, Maya. You embarrassed me tonight. This is how you fix it. Fix? You do this, and I will forget you tried to sabotage my engagement. I might even put in a good word for you with some of my partners. Maybe get you a job that pays more than minimum wage. My parents looked at the papers, then at me, their faces lighting up with relief. See? Patrice said, clapping her hands together. Julian is so forgiving. That is a wonderful idea. Maya can help. She is good at reading. Ebony giggled. Finally, you can contribute something, Maya. Just make sure you get the words right. This is important business, not a French novel. I looked at the documents. I looked at Julian's expectant face. He was trying to turn me into his servant again. He was trying to assert dominance by turning my skill into unpaid labor for his benefit. But as I looked closer at the top page, I saw the header. It wasn't just a merger document. It was a disclosure of liabilities for a shell company based in Luxembourg. A spark of curiosity ignited in my chest. Julian thought he was punishing me. He thought he was giving me busy work. He had no idea he was handing a forensic auditor the keys to his closet full of skeletons. I slowly reached out and touched the papers. You want me to translate everything I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Everything Julian commanded, every clause, every footnote. And do not miss the deadline. I have a meeting with the bank on Monday. I looked at him, and for the first time that night, I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a predator who just watched the prey walk into the trap. Okay, Julian, I said softly. I will do it. I will translate every single word. Good girl, Julian said, patting me on the shoulder like a dog. He turned to Ebony. Come on, babe. Let us go look at the wedding venues. I am tired of dealing with the help. They walked away, leaving me alone in the foyer with the stack of papers. My parents followed them, cooing and fawning, leaving me behind as always. I picked up the documents. They were heavy. They felt like a weapon in my hands. Julian wanted a translation. I would give him one. But I wasn't just going to translate the language. I was going to translate the truth. And once I deciphered what he was hiding in these pages, there wouldn't be a hole deep enough for him to hide in. I sat in the dim light of my father's study, surrounded by the smell of old leather and unread books. The stack of documents Julian had thrown at me lay open on the mahogany desk. My parents and Ebony had gone to the dining room to drink wine and toast to their good fortune, leaving me alone to do the grunt work. They thought they were punishing me. They thought they were humiliating me by forcing me to act as their secretary. They had no idea they had just handed a forensic auditor the murder weapon. I adjusted the desk lamp and pulled the first file closer. Julian had asked for a translation, but what he really needed was a miracle. The cover page was standard corporate boilerplate, but as I turned to the financial disclosures, the language shifted. It was French legalese, dense and intentionally confusing, designed to bore a casual reader into skipping ahead. But I did not skip ahead. I lived for the fine print. I ran my finger down the column of liabilities for Julian's holding company, Archon Tech. The numbers didn't add up. There were massive transfers to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, marked as consulting fees. There were loans taken out against assets that didn't exist. And then buried in a footnote, on page 42, I found it. The phrase was, redressement, fiscal pour fraude aggravée. My heart hammered against my ribs. Adjusted tax liability for aggravated fraud. Julian wasn't just having trouble with his legal team, he was being sued by the French government for tax evasion. His company wasn't merging with a European giant because he was successful. He was trying to sell off his assets in a fire sale to pay a €20 million fine before he was indicted. He was broke. He was worse than broke. He was a criminal desperately trying to find a new host to bleed dry. I sat back in the chair, the room spinning slightly. This was the man my parents were worshipping. This was the savior of the family. He was a con artist in a custom suit. The door to the study creaked open. I quickly flipped the page covering the incriminating footnote. Julian walked in holding a glass of scotch. He was followed closely by Ebony and my parents. They were laughing, flushed with alcohol and greed. The mood in the room shifted instantly from serious investigation to suffocating pressure. How is it going? Maya, Julian asked, leaning against the doorframe. He took a sip of his drink, his eyes gleaming with a predatory light. Find anything interesting? I kept my face impassive. It is very technical, Julian. It will take time to translate accurately. Julian waved his hand dismissively. Do not worry about the details. Just get the gist of it. But actually, we came in here because we need you to do something else first. Something quick. He walked over to the desk and placed a single sheet of paper on top of the stack I was reading. It was a document in English, a loan application. Ebony bounced over to his side, linking her arm through his. She looked at me with a sickeningly sweet smile, the kind she used when she wanted to borrow my car or money. Maya. You know how expensive weddings are, Ebony purred. Julian wants everything to be perfect. We found this venue in Lake Como and it is to die for, but all of Julian's cash is tied up in this merger until next month. My stomach tightened. I looked at the paper. It was a secured loan agreement. Julian needs a little liquidity to put down the deposits, Desmond chimed in, stepping forward. Just a bridge loan. He will pay it back in 30 days with interest. I looked at the collateral line on the application. It didn't list Julian's penthouse. It didn't list his car. It listed 42 Willow Creek Lane. My breath caught in my throat. That was my grandmother's cottage. When Grandma Rose passed away 3 years ago, she left everything to me. She knew my parents favored Ebony. She knew I was the one who took care of her when she got sick. That tiny 2-bedroom house with the overgrown garden was the only thing in the world that was truly mine. It was my sanctuary. It was the only place I felt safe. "You want to mortgage my house?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "It is not a mortgage, silly," Ebony said, rolling her eyes. "It is just collateral. A formality. Julian is good for the money. He is a billionaire, Maya. Do you really think he is going to steal your little shack?" "Then why doesn't he use his own assets?" I asked, looking directly at Julian. Julian sighed, looking bored. "I told you my assets are frozen pending the merger. It is standard procedure. Look, Maya, your parents have already agreed to put up their house." I looked at Desmond and Patrice. They nodded eagerly. "We signed the papers an hour ago," Patrice said proudly. "We are investing in your sister's happiness. We thought you would want to do the same, unless you are too selfish to help family." The trap was so obvious it was insulting. Julian had already leveraged my parents' home. Now he wanted mine. He was gathering every scrap of equity he could find to pay off his debts in Europe, and he was using my sister's wedding as the cover story. If I signed this, the bank would foreclose on Grandma's cottage within months. I would lose the last piece of her I had left. I stood up slowly. I picked up the loan application. "No," I said. The room went silent. The smile dropped from Ebony's face. "Excuse me," Julian asked, his voice dropping an octave. I said no. I repeated, my voice steady despite the shaking of my hands. "I am not signing this. I am not putting Grandma's house up as collateral for a party." Desmond stepped forward, his face turning red. "Maya, do not be difficult. This is for your sister." "I don't care, Dad. Grandma left that house to me. Not to Ebony, not to you, to me. And I am not risking it." Ebony let out a screech of frustration. "You are ruining everything. You are just doing this to spite me. You want me to have a cheap wedding because you are miserable." She turned to Julian, grabbing his lapels. "Julian, make her do it." Julian set his glass down on the desk. The ice cubes clinked against the crystal. He walked around the desk until he was standing inches from me. He invaded my personal space, using his height to intimidate me. The smell of expensive scotch and cologne was overpowering. "Maya," he said softly, dangerously, "I think you are confused about how this works. I am offering you a chance to be part of this family's future. If this merger goes through, we all win. If it stalls because I lack liquidity, we all lose." I looked him in the eye. I knew the merger was a lie. I knew he was sinking, but I couldn't say it, not yet. If I revealed what I knew now, he would destroy the evidence. He would spin a new lie. I needed to trap him publicly. "I am not signing, Julian. Find another way to pay for your ice sculptures." Julian stared at me for a long moment. His eyes were cold, devoid of any humanity. He realized charm wouldn't work. He realized pressure wouldn't work. So he went to his favorite tool: fear. He leaned in close, so close his lips brushed my ear. "Listen to me carefully, you little secretary," he whispered. "I know people in this city. I know the partners at your firm. I know the board members. I have lunch with the people who sign your paycheck." He pulled back slightly, looking at me with a cruel smirk. "If you do not sign this paper, I will make a few phone calls tomorrow morning. I will tell them you are unstable. I will tell them you stole confidential documents from my briefcase. I will tell them whatever I need to tell them to ensure that by noon you are fired, and not just fired, blacklisted. You will never work in this town again. You will be serving coffee at a diner before the week is out." My parents watched silent and complicit. They didn't hear the whisper, but they saw the threat in his posture and they didn't care. They wanted the wedding. They wanted the money. I was expendable. Julian straightened up and buttoned his jacket. "I will leave the paper here," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Think about it tonight, Maya. Think about your career. Think about how much you enjoy paying your bills." He turned to my parents. "Come on, Desmond. Let us go have a cigar. I need to clear my head." They walked out. Ebony stopped at the door, glaring at me. "You better fix this, Maya," she hissed, "or I will never forgive you." She slammed the door, leaving me alone in the study again. I stood there trembling with rage. He had threatened my livelihood. He had threatened my home. He thought he had cornered me. He thought I was just a helpless employee who would fold under the pressure of a billionaire's influence. But he made one critical mistake. He assumed I cared about my job more than I cared about the truth. He assumed I was playing checkers, protecting my pawns. I looked down at the French documents again. The evidence of his fraud stared back at me. I picked up my phone. I didn't call my boss. I didn't call a lawyer. I opened my contacts and scrolled down to a number I hadn't used in 2 years. It was a direct line to a senior analyst at the World Bank in D.C., a woman named Sarah who had been my roommate in Paris. I hit dial. It rang twice. "Maya." Sarah's voice sounded surprised. "It has been forever. Is everything okay?" "No, Sarah," I said, staring at Julian's signature on the fraudulent tax return. "Everything is far from okay. But I think I have something that might interest your friends at the European Anti-Fraud Office." I looked at the loan application for Grandma's house and ripped it in half. "I need you to run a name for me," I said. "Julian Vance. And Sarah, dig deep. I want to know where the bodies are buried." I hung up the phone. Julian wanted a war. He wanted to use his power to crush me. He didn't realize that by threatening to take everything I had left me with nothing to lose. And a woman with nothing to lose is the most dangerous person in the room. The glow of my laptop screen was the only light in the room as I waited for the secure line to connect. It was 3 in the morning in California, but in Washington, D.C., the city was already waking up. My hands were wrapped around a cold cup of coffee, and my eyes were burning from staring at the fraudulent French documents Julian had forced me to translate. I had found the smoke, but now I needed someone to show me the fire. Finally, the phone rang. It was Sarah, my old roommate from Paris, who now worked as a senior risk analyst at the World Bank. Sarah was the kind of woman who could find a missing penny in a billion-dollar budget. If anyone could track Julian's ghost money, it was her. Maya, Sarah's voice came through sharp and breathless. "You need to tell me exactly how you are connected to Julian Vance, and you need to tell me right now." "He is engaged to my sister," I whispered, dread pooling in my stomach. "The wedding is in 2 weeks. Why? What did you find?" There was a pause on the line, followed by the sound of furious typing. "Maya, you need to get your family out. Now. This man is not a billionaire. He is a financial black hole." I leaned closer to the phone. "Explain it to me, Sarah. I saw his tax liability in France. I know he owes money." "It is not just taxes," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I ran his name through our internal watch lists and cross-referenced it with the leaks from the Panama Papers. Archon Tech, his holding company. It is a shell. It has zero revenue, no products, no patents, nothing." "So where does the money come from?" I asked. "The private jets, the vineyard party, the diamond ring on my sister's finger." Sarah let out a harsh laugh. "It comes from new investors. He is running a classic Ponzi scheme, Maya. He finds a new group of wealthy victims, promises them insane returns on a revolutionary tech algorithm that does not exist, and uses their cash to pay off the interest for the previous investors. He is robbing Peter to pay Paul, and he is keeping 20% for himself to fund his lifestyle." I felt the room spin. It was worse than I thought. He wasn't just a failed businessman. He was a predator. He is drowning. Maya? Sarah continued. My data shows he has a liquidity gap of $50 million. He has defaulted on 3 private loans in Zurich this month. That is why he is desperate for this merger with the Pierre Luxury Group. The Pierre Group, I repeated, remembering the name from the documents. Exactly. Pierre is looking to expand into tech. If Julian can close that deal, he gets an injection of $500 million. That money covers his tracks. It pays off the old debts and buys him another 5 years of pretending to be a god. But Pierre is conservative. They only invest in stable founders, family men. The pieces click together like a terrifying puzzle. That is why he needs the wedding, I realized aloud. He does not love Ebony. He needs a show. He needs to present himself as a stable married man with a wholesome American family backing him up. That is why he needs my parents' house and my grandmother's cottage as collateral. He is trying to make his assets look bigger on paper to pass the due diligence check next week. He is using your sister as a prop, Sarah confirmed. And if he gets access to your family's assets, he will leverage them until there is nothing left. When this crashes, and it will crash, he will be on a flight to a non-extradition country, and your parents will be left holding the debt. I thanked Sarah and hung up. I sat in the darkness shivering. My sister wasn't walking down the aisle toward a husband. She was walking into a burning building, and she was locking the doors behind her. I spent the rest of the night plotting. I couldn't just tell my parents. They wouldn't believe me. To them, I was just the jealous, unsuccessful sister. If I showed them spreadsheets, they would say I forged them. Julian had inoculated them against the truth with his charm and his gifts. I needed to let him hang himself. I needed to let the cracks show, and the cracks appeared sooner than I expected. At 10 o'clock the next morning, my phone buzzed. I was back in my small apartment, having left my parents' house before dawn to avoid another confrontation. I looked at the screen. It was Ebony. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to ignore her. Part of me wanted to let her sink. But I needed to gauge the situation. I swiped answer. Hey, Ebony, I said, keeping my voice steady. Maya. Ebony's voice was high-pitched and stressed. Where did you go? Mom is freaking out that you left without saying goodbye. But whatever. Listen, I need a huge favor. I leaned back in my chair. What do you need? I am at the bridal salon. Ebony said, the background noise of rustling fabric and chatting women filling the line. We found it, Maya. The dress. It is custom Vera Wang. It is absolutely stunning. You should see the lace. It costs $15,000, but it is worth every penny. That sounds nice, Ebony, I said dryly. It is more than nice, it is essential, she snapped. But look, there is a tiny issue. The boutique requires a $10,000 deposit right now to start the alterations for the wedding next week. I tried to use the black card Julian gave me, but it got declined. My heart skipped a beat. The collapse had started. Declined, I asked innocently. Did you call Julian? Yeah, I called him, Ebony said, sounding annoyed but not suspicious. He said his banks are doing a system-wide maintenance update because of the merger. All his accounts are temporarily frozen for security for 24 hours. Can you believe the timing? It is so annoying. System maintenance. The oldest lie in the book. Banks do maintenance at 3 a.m. on Sundays, not at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday. His accounts weren't frozen for security. They were frozen because they were empty. So Ebony continued, her voice taking on that wheedling, demanding tone I knew so well. I need you to wire me the $10,000, just for today. Julian will pay you back tomorrow with interest. He promised. I closed my eyes. My $10,000. That was my entire savings account. She wanted me to drain my emergency fund to pay for a dress for a wedding that was a sham to a man who was stealing from us. I cannot do that, Ebony, I said firmly. What do you mean you can't? She shrieked. You have the money. I know Grandma left you some cash. Don't be stingy, Maya. This is my wedding dress. I am not being stingy, I said. I am being smart. Ebony, think about it. Billionaires do not have credit cards that stop working because of maintenance. That does not happen. Oh my God, stop it! Ebony yelled. Stop trying to sabotage me. You are just happy that something went wrong. You want me to be embarrassed in front of the sales ladies. I am trying to protect you, I countered. If he cannot pay for the deposit, how is he going to pay for the wedding? He is rich. Ebony screamed, her voice cracking. He is having a cash flow issue. It happens to business people all the time. You wouldn't understand because you are just a secretary. Fine, I said, my patience snapping. If he is so rich, let him call the boutique owner. Let him wire the money himself. But I am not giving you a dime. Not today. Not ever. I hung up the phone. My hands were shaking. I knew what would happen next. She would call our parents. Desmond would probably drain his 401k to pay for the dress, convinced that Julian would reimburse him. They were bleeding themselves dry to keep the fantasy alive. I looked at the stack of translated documents on my desk. Julian wanted me to translate his lies. I had done more than that. I had decoded his destruction. He was broke. He was desperate. And that meant he was dangerous. But he had made one fatal miscalculation. He thought the quiet sister was weak. He didn't know that while he was playing checkers with my family's money, I was playing chess with his freedom. And I had just moved my knight into position. The endgame was approaching, and Julian Vance was about to find out that system maintenance was the least of his problems. The next morning, Julian did not ask me to join him. He ordered me. He banged on my apartment door at 7 a.m., holding a nondescript black dress on a hanger and looking manic. He told me to put it on and to tie my hair back because he did not want me drawing attention to myself. He said I was there to be a voice, not a person. I was to carry his briefcase, pour the water, and translate his lies into French for a meeting that would determine whether he went to prison or to a private island. We drove to the St. Regis in downtown San Francisco. Julian was sweating through his cologne. He kept checking his reflection in the rearview mirror, rehearsing his pitch. He told me that if I messed this up, if I stuttered or hesitated, he would make sure my parents lost their home by the end of the month. He didn't know that his threats were empty now. He was a dead man walking. He just hadn't heard the gunshot yet. We took the elevator to the penthouse suite. The strategic partner Julian was meeting was a man named Pierre Dubois. Julian had described him as an old money dinosaur who needed tech expertise. He thought Pierre was just a checkbook with legs. I knew Pierre differently. 2 years ago, I had led the negotiation team that saved Pierre's luxury conglomerate from a hostile takeover by a Chinese firm. I had spent weeks in conference rooms with him. I knew his favorite wine. I knew about his grandchildren. And I knew that he valued integrity above all else. When the suite doors opened, Pierre was standing by the window, looking out at the bay. He turned around, his face set in a mask of polite indifference. He was a tall man, with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. Julian strode forward, extending his hand, exuding fake confidence. Monsieur Dubois, it is an honor. I am Julian Vance. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for seeing. Pierre shook his hand briefly, then his eyes drifted past Julian. They landed on me. I was standing a few feet behind Julian, holding his heavy leather bag, wearing the cheap black dress. For a split second, Pierre's composure cracked. His eyes widened. He took a half step forward, his mouth opening to say my name. He knew me as Maya the Shark, the closer the woman who commanded boardrooms in Paris. Seeing me posing as a subservient secretary was like seeing a lion perform tricks in a circus. I locked eyes with him. I slowly raised my index finger to my lips in a subtle shushing motion, then gave a barely perceptible shake of my head. Pierre froze. He was a brilliant businessman. He understood instantly that a game was being played. He closed his mouth, adjusted his cufflinks, and gave me a slight, imperceptible nod. He stepped back into his role. "And who is this?" Pierre asked in English, his voice cool. Julian laughed dismissively, not even looking at me. Oh, this is just Maya. She is my fiancé's sister. She speaks a little French, so I brought her along to help with the translation. She is helping out the family. You know how it is. Charity begins at home. He snapped his fingers at me. Maya put the bag down and pour Monsieur Dubois some sparkling water. And sit in the corner. Do not speak unless I tell you to translate. I saw the flash of fury in Pierre's eyes. He hated rudeness. He hated arrogance. But he respected me too much to blow my cover. I walked over to the side table, poured the water, and set it down in front of him. Merci, Mademoiselle Pierre said softly, holding my gaze for a second longer than necessary. I retreated to the corner chair, notebook in hand. The meeting began. Julien launched into his pitch. He was selling a vision of Archon Tech as a revolutionary AI platform that would change the luxury retail market. He spoke fast, using buzzwords to cover up the lack of substance. Tell him, Julien commanded me, looking at Pierre but pointing at me. Tell him that our user retention rate is 90% and that our algorithm has a patent pending status in 3 countries. I cleared my throat. I looked at Pierre. I spoke in French, my voice steady and professional. Monsieur Dubois, Mr. Vance claims a retention rate of 90%. However, as you know from the due diligence files I sent you anonymously last night, the actual rate is less than 12%. The patent applications he mentions were rejected 6 months ago for lack of novelty. Pierre nodded slowly, rubbing his chin, looking at Julien with feigned impressed interest. Très bien, Pierre said. Very impressive numbers. Julien beamed, thinking I had translated his lie perfectly. He grew bolder. Tell him, Julien said, puffing out his chest, that we are currently cash flow positive and that this investment is purely for expansion into the Asian market. Tell him I have turned down 3 other offers because I want to work with him specifically. I turned to Pierre again. He is lying about the cash flow, I said in French. The company is insolvent. He is using new investment capital to pay off personal debts. He has no other offers. You are his last resort before bankruptcy. He is desperate, Pierre. He needs this money to pay for a wedding that is designed to defraud you. Pierre leaned back in his chair, tenting his fingers. He looked at Julien, studying him like a bug under a microscope. Ask him, Pierre said to me in French, why he is so generous to offer me such a large equity stake if the company is doing so well. I switched to English. Monsieur Dubois asks why you are offering 30% equity if the company is already profitable. It seems too generous. Julien wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead. He laughed nervously. Tell him I value partnership over profit. Tell him I see him as a mentor. I switched back to French. He says he needs a mentor. What he means is he needs a shield against the lawsuits that are coming. He is trying to flatter you because he thinks you are old and easily manipulated. Pierre's lips twitched. He almost smiled. I see, Pierre said. Julien was ecstatic. He thought he was winning. He thought he was charming the billionaire. He stood up and walked to the window, gesturing grandly at the city. We are going to rule this city, Pierre, Julien said in English, forgetting himself for a moment. Me and you. We are going to build a legacy. Pierre stood up as well. He checked his watch. I have heard enough, Pierre said in heavily accented English. I will have my legal team draw up the papers. We will sign the agreement at your wedding, yes. It will be how do you say? A celebration of unions. Julien pumped his fist in the air. Yes, exactly. A celebration. That is perfect. We can live stream it. Pierre looked at me. His eyes were twinkling with a mixture of amusement and deadly seriousness. Yes, Pierre said. A live stream. The whole world should see exactly who you are, Mr. Vance. Julien turned to me, snapping his fingers again. Maya, pack up. We are leaving. You actually did okay today. I guess you are not totally useless after all. He grabbed his water glass and drained it, leaving the empty glass on the table for me to clean up. I stood up and walked over to the table. I picked up the glass. I looked at Pierre one last time. Thank you for your time, monsieur, I said in French. I will see you at the wedding. I will be there. Maya, Pierre replied softly in French. And I will bring the popcorn. We walked out of the suite. Julian was practically skipping down the hallway. He pulled out his phone and called Ebony. "Baby, we did it!" he shouted into the phone. The old man ate it up. He has no idea. We are going to be rich. I walked behind him, carrying his heavy bag, listening to him brag about conquering a man who could buy and sell him 10 times over. Julian thought he had secured his future. He didn't realize he had just invited the executioner to his wedding, and he had asked him to bring the contract. As we got into the car, Julian turned to me. "Here," he said, tossing a crumpled $20 bill into my lap. "Go buy yourself some lunch. You looked a little hungry in there." I looked at the $20 bill. I didn't throw it back. I folded it neatly and put it in my pocket. "Thank you, Julian," I said. I would keep it. It was the first and last time Julian Vance would ever pay me for my services, and I wanted to remember exactly what he thought I was worth so I could enjoy it even more when I showed him the real bill. The boutique smelled of lavender and judgment. It was one of those places in Union Square where the security guard wore a suit, nicer than my car, and the price tags were hidden, because if you had to ask, you did not belong there. Ebony and my mother Patrice were already inside sipping complimentary champagne and pointing at racks of silk and organza. I walked in 5 minutes late because I had been on a call with the fraud department in Paris solidifying the trap for Julian. But to them, I was just late because I was disorganized. Ebony spotted me and waved a manicured hand. "Over here, Maya. We found it. We found the perfect dress for you." My stomach tightened. I knew what was coming. In Ebony's world, a bridesmaid was not a supporter. She was a prop. And specifically, I was a prop, designed to make the bride look thinner, richer, and more beautiful by comparison. The sales associate, a woman named Chloe, who had a face full of filler and a soul full of ice, held up a hanger. The dress was hideous. It was a neon lime green monstrosity made of stiff taffeta with puffed sleeves that looked like they belonged in a bad 80s prom movie. It was cut to be unflattering, the kind of dress that would make a supermodel look frumpy. "Try it on," Patrice said, her eyes gleaming. "It is the color of the season. It matches the floral arrangements Julian picked out." I looked at the dress. I looked at my mother. "Mom, this is lime green," I said. "It is going to clash with my skin tone. It is going to look ridiculous." Ebony sighed, setting down her champagne flute. "It is not about you, Maya. It is about the aesthetic. You are supposed to blend into the garden theme. Just put it on. Unless you gained weight again and are afraid it won't zip." Chloe, the salesgirl, smirked. She looked me up and down with open disdain. "Actually," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy, "if you are worried about the fit, the clearance rack is in the back near the restrooms. We have some plus sizes there that might be more within your budget. This section is strictly couture." The insult was precise and practiced. She assumed I was poor because I dressed simply. She assumed I was unworthy because Ebony treated me like dirt. I didn't move toward the dressing room. Instead, I walked over to a display pedestal in the center of the room. Sitting on a velvet cushion was a pair of heels. They were breathtaking. Midnight blue satin encrusted with Swarovski crystals with a signature red sole. They were the limited edition pumps I had seen in Vogue last month. $5,000. I picked one up, admiring the craftsmanship. "Put that down," Chloe snapped, rushing over. "Those are display only. You need gloves to handle the merchandise." Ebony laughed. "Maya, stop embarrassing us. You cannot afford the shoelaces on those, let alone the shoes. Stick to the green dress. It covers up your poverty." That was the line. It covers up your poverty. Something inside me snapped. Not a loud snap, but a quiet, dangerous click. I was tired of the narrative. I was tired of pretending to be the poor relation while I secretly owned more equity in this city than Julian Vance ever would. I looked at Chloe. "Do you have these in a size 8? I asked calmly. Chloe crossed her arms. "We do. But I'm not going to bring them out for you to play dress up. We have serious customers to attend to." I reached into my purse. I bypassed my debit card. I bypassed my standard credit card. I reached into the hidden slot in my wallet and pulled out a card made of heavy black titanium. The American Express Centurion, the black card. Invitation only. No limit. I didn't hand it to her. I dropped it on the glass display case. The sound it made was heavy. Clink. Chloe looked down. Her eyes widened. The smirk vanished from her face, instantly replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated panic. She knew what that card meant. It meant I could buy the store, fire her, and turn the building into a parking lot before lunch. Size 8, I repeated, and wrap them up. I am not trying them on. I am taking them. Chloe snatched the card with trembling hands. Yes, of course, ma'am. Right away. I will get the manager to process this. She practically ran to the back room. Ebony and Patrice stared at the black card sitting on the counter before Chloe took it. Their mouths hung open. The silence was deafening. Maya Patrice whispered, "Where did you get that card?" "That is a black card. Only multimillionaires have those." My mind raced. I couldn't tell them the truth. Not yet. If they knew I was wealthy, Julian would find out. He would sue me. He would guilt-trip me. He would try to drain me dry to save his sinking ship. I snatched the receipt as Chloe returned with the box, bowing and scraping. "It is a corporate card," I lied smoothly, tucking the box under my arm. "My boss asked me to pick up a gift for his wife while I was out. He trusted me with the company expense account." Ebony let out a breath she had been holding. She laughed a nervous, relieved sound. "Oh my God, you scared me," Ebony said, clutching her chest. "I thought for a second you were actually holding out on us. Of course it is your boss's card. I was about to say there is no way you could get approved for a Target card, let alone that." Patrice frowned. "You shouldn't be using a company card for personal shopping, Maya. That is irresponsible. You could get in trouble." "I am just doing my job, Mom," I said. "Unlike some people." The door chimes rang. We all turned. Julian walked in. He looked stressed. His phone was glued to his ear, and he was arguing with someone about liquidity and wire transfers. He hung up when he saw us, pasting that fake charming smile onto his face. "Ladies," Julian announced, "I hope we are finding everything we need." He walked over and kissed Ebony on the cheek, but his eyes were scanning the room, looking for something to criticize. His gaze landed on the box in my hands. The logo was visible. "Nice shoes," Julian said. "Who are those for?" Ebony waved her hand. "Maya's boss. She is running errands for him. Can you believe he gave her a black card to use? She almost gave the salesgirl a heart attack." Julian's eyes narrowed. He looked at the box. He looked at me. I could see the gears turning in his desperate, greedy mind. He was broke. His cards were declining. He needed to keep Ebony happy, but he had no cash. He reached out and took the box from my hands. "Hey," I protested. Julian opened the lid. He whistled. "These are gorgeous. Midnight blue. They match the theme perfectly." He looked at Ebony. "Babe, these would look incredible on you for the rehearsal dinner." Ebony's eyes lit up. "Oh my God, they would. But they are for Maya's boss's wife." Julian laughed. He closed the lid and tucked the box under his own arm. "Screw her boss," Julian said. "He is probably some corporate fat cat who won't even notice. Besides, Maya, you owe me." "I owe you?" I asked, my voice rising. "For the translation," Julian said smoothly, "and for the emotional distress you caused at the engagement party. Consider this a tax." He turned to me, his face hard. "You used a company card, right? So it is not your money. It is a victimless crime. Just tell your boss they were out of stock, or tell him you lost the receipt. You are the assistant, figure it out. He was stealing. He was openly stealing a $5,000 pair of shoes because he felt entitled to them. He thought he was stealing from a stranger. He didn't know he was stealing from me." "Julian, you cannot take those," I said, stepping forward. "That is theft." Julian stepped into my space, his voice dropping to a whisper so the salesgirl couldn't hear. "Watch me." "What are you going to do, Maya? Call the police and tell them what?" "That you let your sister's fiancé take a pair of shoes. I will tell them you gave them to me. I will tell your boss you are reckless with company funds. I will get you fired. He patted my cheek. Ebony deserves these. You don't. You are just the delivery girl. Remember your place. He turned back to Ebony and Patrice holding the box up like a trophy. A gift for my beautiful bride, he announced. Ebony squealed and hugged him. Oh, Julian, you are the best. You are so bad, but I love it. Patrice beamed. See Maya. He is a provider. He takes charge. You should learn from him. I stood there watching them. I watched my sister fawn over a thief. I watched my mother applaud a crime. And I watched Julian Vance walk out of the store with my property under his arm, thinking he was the king of the world. I didn't fight him. I didn't scream. I let him take them. Because in my mind I was adding $5,000 to the ledger. Every insult, every threat, every stolen dollar was being recorded. He thought he was getting free shoes. He didn't realize he was just adding weight to the concrete block I was about to tie around his ankles. I turned to Chloe, the salesgirl, who was watching with confusion. Do you have the receipt? I asked. She handed it to me. I tucked it into my purse next to the translated fraud documents. I hope they fit, I whispered to myself. Because he is going to have a hard time running in them when the police come. The drive back to my apartment should have been a time to decompress, but the universe had other plans. I was barely 10 minutes away from the boutique, my mind still replaying the image of Julian walking out with my property when my phone rang. It was Mrs. Gable, the 70-year-old widow who lived next door to my grandmother's cottage. She was the kind of neighbor who baked cookies for the mailman and kept a meticulous watch over the neighborhood cats. She never called unless it was an emergency. Maya, you need to get down here. Mrs. Gable's voice was trembling, thin with panic. There are men in the yard, men in suits. They are digging up your grandmother's rose bushes. My blood ran cold. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. What do you mean they are digging? Who are they? I do not know, dear, she stammered. I went out to ask them what they were doing, and one of them, a rude man with a clipboard, told me to mind my own business. He said they were conducting a survey for the new owners. He said the property closed escrow this morning. The world tilted on its axis. Closed escrow. That was impossible. You cannot sell a house without the owner's signature. You cannot transfer a deed without a notary. Unless fraud was involved. Unless someone had decided that the laws of the land did not apply to them. I pulled a U-turn in the middle of traffic, earning a chorus of angry horns, and sped toward Willow Creek Lane. When I arrived, the sight made me physically ill. A sleek black sedan was parked in the driveway, blocking the path. Two men were indeed walking around the perimeter with measuring tape. But the real dagger was the wooden post that had been hammered into the front lawn. It held a sign, sold. I didn't stop to talk to the men. I didn't need to hear their excuses. I knew exactly whose hand was behind this. I threw the car into reverse and drove straight to my parents' estate. I didn't knock. I used my key, the key they had forgotten to take back, and stormed into the dining room. Desmond and Patrice were sitting at the long mahogany table, eating a dinner of roast lamb, as if they hadn't just sanctioned the theft of my inheritance. Julian wasn't there, which was probably the only reason I didn't set the room on fire. I slammed my purse onto the table, making the silverware rattle. How could you? I screamed. The sound tore through the quiet elegance of the room. How could you let him sell it? Patrice looked up, a fork full of potatoes halfway to her mouth. She didn't look guilty. She looked annoyed that her meal had been interrupted. Maya, lower your voice, she scolded. We are eating. I am not lowering anything, I yelled. There is a sold sign on Grandma's house. Mrs. Gable told me surveyors are tearing up the garden. That house belongs to me. It is in my name. How did he sell it? Desmond wiped his mouth with a linen napkin. He took a slow sip of his wine before answering. He looked at me with the weary expression of a parent dealing with a toddler's tantrum. It is done, Maya, Desmond said calmly. Julian needed the liquidity immediately. The bridge loan wasn't coming through fast enough, and he found a cash buyer who was willing to close in 24 hours. It was a miracle, really. A miracle, I repeated, my voice shaking. It is a felony, Dad. It is grand larceny. I did not sign anything. Desmond sighed. He reached under the table and pulled out a manila folder. He slid it across the polished wood toward me. Technically, you did, he said. I opened the folder. Inside was a grant deed. It transferred the title of 42 Willow Creek Lane from Maya Vance to a holding company I recognized as one of Julian's shells. And at the bottom in blue ink was my signature. It was a good forgery. He had practiced. But the loop on the M was too wide. The slant was slightly off. I looked up at my father, horror washing over me. This is a forgery, I whispered. You let him forge my signature. You watched him do it. Desmond slammed his hand on the table. We did what had to be done. He shouted, his calm facade finally cracking. Julian is family. He is going to make us all billionaires. He just needs a little help to get over this hump. What is one dusty old cottage compared to the future of this family? You are being selfish, Maya. You are hoarding an asset that you hardly use while your sister's future hangs in the balance. I stared at him. This man who had raised me, who had taught me right from wrong, was looking me in the eye and justifying a crime because he was blinded by greed. It is not about the money, I said, my voice rising again. It is about Grandma. She left that house to me because she knew you would do this. She knew you would strip it for parts to feed your vanity. Patrice stood up. Do not bring your grandmother into this. She was a stubborn old woman just like you. And if she were here, she would want Ebony to have a perfect wedding. I grabbed the folder. I am going to the police, I said, turning toward the door. I am showing them this. I am showing them the forgery. I am going to have Julian arrested, and I am going to sue both of you for conspiracy. I took 2 steps before I heard the chair scrape against the floor. Desmond moved faster than I thought possible for a man his age. He caught me by the arm, spinning me around. His face was purple with rage. The veins in his neck were bulging. You will do no such thing, he hissed. Let go of me, I said, trying to pull away. You are not going to ruin this for us, he growled. Do you know how much we have invested in Julian? Do you know how much face we will lose if he is arrested days before the wedding? I do not care, I screamed. He is a criminal. Desmond's hand came up. The slap was hard. It was loud. It connected with my cheekbone with a force that sent me stumbling back into the sideboard. A vase wobbled and crashed to the floor, shattering into 1,000 pieces. The room went dead silent. I stood there clutching my cheek. My ear was ringing. I tasted blood in my mouth. I looked at my father. He was breathing heavily, his hand still raised, but there was no regret in his eyes. There was only the cold, hard look of a man who would destroy anything that threatened his delusion. You ungrateful child, Desmond spat. I put clothes on your back. I put a roof over your head. And this is how you repay me, by trying to sabotage your sister. Julian will pay you back. He said he would give you double the value of the house after the merger. He is doing you a favor, and you are too stupid to see it. Patrice sat back down, picking up her wineglass with a trembling hand. Sit down, Maya, she said, refusing to look at me. Stop making a scene. Your father is right. You are hysterical. It is just a house. I looked at them. I looked at the shattered vase on the floor. I looked at the man who had just struck me to protect a con artist. Something inside me died in that moment. The little girl who just wanted her parents to love her. The daughter who kept trying to prove her worth. She evaporated. In her place, something cold and sharp took root. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I slowly lowered my hand from my face. I straightened my spine. I adjusted my dress. I looked at Desmond, locking eyes with him until he was the one who looked away. You hit me, I said softly. Desmond adjusted his cufflinks, trying to regain his composure. You left me no choice. You were acting irrational. I nodded slowly. Okay, I said. Desmond looked confused. Okay. I walked over to the table and picked up my purse. I left the forged deed on the table. I didn't need it. I had seen enough. You want the house? I said, my voice devoid of emotion. Take it. Let Julian have it. Let him mortgage it. Let him sell it. Patrice let out a sigh of relief. Finally, you are seeing reason. But I continued walking to the door. I want you to remember this moment. I want you to remember that when I tried to save you, you hit me. I want you to remember that when I tried to stop you from jumping off a cliff, you pushed me over the edge instead. I opened the door. The night air rushed in cool and crisp. You think this is a game, I said, looking back at them one last time? You think you can break the laws and break people because you have money. I stepped onto the porch. If you want to play by jungle rules, Dad, that is fine. But you forgot one thing. I lived in the jungle. You just visited the zoo. I slammed the door shut. I walked to my car, the taste of blood still metallic on my tongue. I didn't drive home. I drove to the nearest 24-hour copy center. I pulled the thumb drive from my keychain. It contained the scans of the fraudulent tax returns, the emails from the World Bank, and the photos I had secretly taken of the forged deed before Desmond grabbed it. I wasn't going to the police yet. That was too easy. Prison was too good for them. I wanted total public irreversible destruction. I pulled out my phone and dialed Pierre's private number. It was midnight in Paris, but I knew he would be awake. He answered on the first ring. Maya, Pierre. I said, staring at the sold sign that was still burned into my memory. The wedding. Is the live stream confirmed? Yes, he said. It is all set up. Good, I said. Make sure the resolution is high. I want the world to see the sweat on his forehead when his life ends. I hung up. I touched my cheek where my father had hit me. It would bruise. Good. I would wear that bruise to the wedding like a badge of honor. It was the last thing they would ever give me, and I intended to use it to bury them. The sun rose over San Francisco with a deceptive calm. While the city was waking up to coffee and traffic reports, I was sitting at my kitchen table watching the digital trap I had set the night before snap shut. I hadn't slept. I didn't need to. The adrenaline of the impending execution was more potent than any caffeine. My cheek was still tender where my father had struck me, turning a shade of purple that no amount of concealer could fully hide. But I didn't want to hide it. It was my fuel. At 8 a.m. sharp, my phone buzzed. It was a secure message from Pierre. The call is made. The fish has swallowed the hook. I allowed myself a grim smile. Across town, in the penthouse suite that was currently being paid for with my parents' stolen retirement funds, Julian Vance was having the best morning of his life. I didn't need to be there to see it. I could hear it through the frantic celebratory texts that started blowing up the family group chat. OMGGGG, Ebony wrote, followed by a string of ring and champagne emojis. You guys won't believe it. Pierre just called. He wants to sign the merger at the wedding. This is destiny. My mother replied instantly. I knew Julian would pull it off. God is good. A true visionary, my father added. This justifies everything. I stared at the screen. Justifies everything. Justifies the forgery. Justifies the theft. Justifies the slap. They were celebrating their victory lap, completely unaware that they were running on a track I had rigged with explosives. An hour later, Julian called me. I expected him to sound smug, but he sounded manic. He was high on his own supply, drunk on the illusion of power. Maya, he shouted into the phone. Did you hear? Did your sister tell you I heard Julian? I said, keeping my voice flat. Congratulations. Congratulations. Is that all you have to say? He laughed, a harsh barking sound. This is historic. Maya, Pierre Dubois, the lion of luxury, wants to sign the deal during the reception. He said my vision was too important to wait. He wants to broadcast it to the world. I gripped the phone tighter. Pierre had played his part perfectly. He had fed Julian's narcissism until it was bloated and blind. That is amazing, Julian, I said. A live broadcast. Yes, Julian yelled. I need you to handle the logistics, since you are so good at whatever it is you do. I want LED screens, massive ones. I want a live stream set up with multiple angles. I want the world to see the moment I become a billionaire. Call the AV company, tell them to upgrade the package, put it on the card I gave you. He meant the card that he had stolen from me. The irony was so rich I could taste it. I will handle it, I said. I will make sure the screens are big enough for everyone to see exactly who you are. Good girl, he said. And Maya. Try not to screw this up. This is the most important moment of my life. Oh, Julian, I whispered after he hung up. It is the most important moment of mine, too. I spent the next 2 days moving like a ghost. I contacted the AV company Julian had hired. I told them I was the coordinator for the special presentation. I sent them a file. It wasn't the slideshow of Julian and Ebony's engagement photos. It was a file named The Truth. I password protected it and told the technician, a young guy named Dave, that it was a surprise video from the groom's investors and that he was to play it exactly when I gave the signal. Dave didn't ask questions. He just wanted to get paid. I went to my grandmother's house one last time. The sold sign was still there. The surveyors had left little orange flags all over the lawn marking the property lines for the demolition crew Julian had surely already scheduled. I walked through the garden, touching the roses my grandmother had planted. I promise you, Grandma, I whispered to the wind, they won't take a single brick. By the eve of the wedding, the tension in the air was palpable. The rehearsal dinner was a blur of forced laughter and expensive wine. I wore the lime green dress they had forced on me, standing in the background, while Ebony preened in the midnight blue shoes Julian had stolen from me. Every time she took a step, the crystals on the shoes caught the light. Every time she laughed, I checked the time. At the dinner, Julian stood up to make a toast. He held his glass high, looking out at the room full of friends and sycophants. To family, Julian said, flashing his perfect veneered smile. To the people who stand by you, who sacrifice for the greater vision. I want to thank Desmond and Patrice for trusting me. You bet on the right horse, and tomorrow that bet pays out 1,000 to 1. My parents beamed, raising their glasses. Desmond's hand was steady. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at the bruise on my cheek that I had covered with heavy makeup. He only saw the dollar signs dancing in his head. Julian turned his gaze to me, and to Maya he said, his voice dripping with faux sincerity, "Thank you for handling the technical details. I know it is hard for you watching your little sister surpass you in every way, but I appreciate you staying in your lane and being useful." The room chuckled. A few people glanced at me with pity. The invisible sister, the secretary, the help. I raised my glass. "To the truth," I said softly. Julian laughed. "Sure, to the truth, whatever that means." Later that night, as I was leaving the venue, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Julian. He couldn't resist one final jab, one final reminder of my place in his world. I opened the message. "Make sure you wear something decent tomorrow. I don't want you looking like a slob in the background of my live stream. And bring a pen. You can serve drinks to the lawyers while the adults do business. Be ready to serve you useless sister-in-law." I stared at the glowing screen in the dark parking lot. Useless. That word echoed in my head. It was the word my mother used when I wanted to read instead of shop. It was the word my father used when I chose a state college instead of the expensive private school Ebony barely graduated from. It was the label they had slapped on my forehead the day I was born. But they had forgotten the definition of the word. Useless means without function. And tomorrow, I had a very specific function. I was the demolition expert. I didn't reply to the text. I didn't cry. I drove home and walked straight to my closet. I pushed aside the beige cardigans and the sensible flats. I reached into the back, past the clothes of the woman they thought I was, and pulled out the garment bag I had brought back from Paris 2 years ago. I unzipped it. Inside was a suit cut from stark white Italian wool. It was sharp, structural, and commanding. It was the suit I had worn when I negotiated a trade deal that saved a French automotive company from bankruptcy. It was the suit of a woman who didn't ask for permission. I hung it on the doorframe. I placed the evidence file on the dresser next to it. "I am not coming to serve drinks, Julian," I said to the silence of my apartment. "I am coming to serve a warrant." The trap was set. The bait was taken. The cameras were ready to roll. All that was left was for the groom to say "I do" to his own destruction, and I would be right there front and center holding the detonator. The wedding of the century looked less like a celebration of love and more like a coronation for a king who didn't know his throne was made of cardboard. Julian had rented out the grand ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel, a venue that dripped with gold leaf and history. Outside, a fleet of drones buzzed against the San Francisco skyline, capturing aerial footage for the live stream that Julian had promised would break the internet. Paparazzi hired by Julian's PR team lined the red carpet entrance, their flashbulbs popping in a rhythmic, blinding staccato that fed the narcissism of everyone who walked through the doors. I arrived precisely 10 minutes before the reception was scheduled to begin. I stepped out of my car and handed the keys to the valet. I was not wearing the hideous lime green bridesmaid dress my mother had picked out. I was wearing the white Italian suit. It was stark sharp and commanded attention. When I walked onto the red carpet, a few photographers turned their cameras toward me, confused by my presence, but drawn to the energy I was projecting. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I walked with the singular focus of a soldier entering enemy territory. Inside the ballroom was the assault on the senses. Thousands of white orchids cascaded from the ceiling. A 12-piece orchestra played on a revolving stage. The air smelled of expensive perfume and the distinct metallic scent of desperation. I scanned the room. My parents, Desmond and Patrice, were holding court near the front. They were laughing too loudly, drinking too quickly, basking in the reflected glory of a wealth that wasn't theirs. They looked relieved. They thought they had pulled it off. They thought the sale of my grandmother's house had saved them. I walked over to the seating chart, an ornate mirror with names written in gold calligraphy. I looked for the head table. My parents were there. Julian's business associates were there. Even a few D-list celebrities were there. I found my name. Maya Vance. Table 45. I looked around the room. Table 45 wasn't near the dance floor. It wasn't near the stage. It was tucked into the far back corner, wedged between the swinging doors of the service kitchen and the entrance to the restrooms. It was the table reserved for the photographer's assistants and the overflow guests who were only invited to fill seats. A waiter bumped into me as he rushed out of the kitchen with a tray of appetizers. "Excuse me," he muttered. I looked at the table. It was the ultimate insult. Julian wanted me to watch his triumph from the nosebleed section. He wanted to remind me one last time that I was nothing more than a spectator in his life. I sat down. I placed my clutch on the table. Inside was the USB drive containing the evidence. I didn't feel humiliated. I felt cold. I felt precise. Let him have his moment, I thought. Let him climb as high as possible so the fall is fatal. The lights dimmed. The orchestra swelled to a crescendo. A spotlight hit the double doors at the top of the grand staircase. "Ladies and gentlemen," the master of ceremonies announced, his voice booming through the speakers. "Please welcome the billionaire power couple of the year, Mr. Julian Vance and Mrs. Ebony Vance." The doors swung open. Fireworks, actual indoor pyrotechnics, shot up from the stage. Julian and Ebony walked out. Ebony looked beautiful, I had to admit that. She was wearing the $15,000 dress I had refused to pay for. She was beaming, waving to the crowd like a pageant queen. But it was Julian who stole the show. He was wearing a tuxedo that probably cost more than my car. He held Ebony's hand, but he wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the cameras. He was looking at the livestream monitors to make sure his good side was visible to the millions of people he imagined were watching. They descended the stairs to thunderous applause. My parents were clapping so hard I thought their hands would bleed. Julian led Ebony to the dance floor for a brief choreographed first dance, but he cut it short. He didn't want to dance. He wanted to speak. He wanted to brag. He took the microphone from the MC and walked to the center of the stage. The massive LED screens behind him projected his face in high definition, 60 feet tall. "Thank you," Julian said, his voice smooth and practiced. "Thank you all for being here to witness history. Tonight isn't just about love, it is about legacy. It is about the union of two dynasties." He paused for effect, looking out at the crowd. "I want to take a moment to thank my new in-laws, Desmond and Patrice. Please stand up." My parents stood up, glowing with pride. The spotlight hit them. These two incredible people. Julian continued, switching to his broken, arrogant French for a moment to impress the investors. "Ils ont tout sacrifié." They sacrificed everything for this vision. They understood that to build an empire you have to be willing to invest. They even liquidated a family property, a charming little estate on Willow Creek Lane, to ensure that this merger could happen on schedule. A murmur went through the crowd. It was a humble brag designed to make my parents look generous. But to me, it was a confession. He had just admitted on a recorded live stream that the proceeds from the sale of my grandmother's house were used for his merger. He had just tied the crime to the timeline perfectly. "Thank you," Julian said, switching back to English. "Your sacrifice will be repaid 100-fold when Archon Tech goes global tomorrow." He scanned the room, his eyes searching the back corners. He knew where he had seated me. He wanted to make sure I heard this next part. And to the rest of the family, Julian said, his tone shifting slightly. "To those who couldn't contribute, to those who didn't believe, to my sister-in-law, Maya." The spotlight swung wildly around the room until it found me sitting by the kitchen doors. I didn't flinch. I stared straight into the light. I stared straight at the camera lens. "There she is," Julian said, chuckling. "Sitting in the back. You know, folks, Maya is a special case. She is the cautionary tale." While Ebony and I were building the future, Maya was worried about the small stuff. She didn't want to sign the papers. She didn't want to be part of the team. He walked to the edge of the stage, looking down at me from across the vast ballroom. "It is a shame, really," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "It is sad that my sister-in-law is so useless that her only contribution to this wedding was showing up to drink the free champagne. But hey, we need an audience, right? Someone has to clap for the winners. So Maya, enjoy the meal. It is probably the most expensive thing you will ever eat." The crowd laughed. It was a cruel, nervous laughter. My parents didn't defend me. Ebony didn't look away. They let him roast me on a global stage because they thought I was powerless to stop it. Julian turned back to the center of the room, dismissing me like a gnat. "But enough about the spectators," he roared. "Let us get to the main event. As many of you know, Archon Tech is not just a company, it is a revolution. And tonight we are joining forces with the greatest luxury brand in the world." He gestured to the side of the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome my partner, my mentor, and the man who is about to sign a check for $500 million. The CEO of Pierre Luxury Group, Monsieur Pierre Dubois." The doors opened again. The music shifted to a dramatic orchestral piece. Pierre walked out. He looked impeccable in a black tuxedo. He carried a leather portfolio. He walked with the slow, deliberate pace of a man who owned the room. Julian practically vibrated with excitement. He rushed over to shake Pierre's hand. "Pierre, welcome," Julian shouted, playing to the cameras. "The world is watching." Pierre nodded. He didn't smile. He walked to the sleek glass table that had been set up in the center of the stage. There were 2 pens, there was a bottle of champagne, and there were the contracts. Julian grabbed a pen. He looked at the camera. He looked at Ebony. He looked at the crowd. "This is it," he said breathlessly. "The moment everything changes." The MC's voice boomed over the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, the moment we have all been waiting for, the signing of the historic merger between Archon Tech and Pierre Luxury Group." The room went silent. Every eye was glued to the stage. Julian uncapped his pen. He hovered it over the paper. He was seconds away from what he thought was victory. I stood up. I picked up my clutch. I walked past the kitchen doors. I walked past the restrooms. I started walking down the center aisle toward the stage. I wasn't walking fast. I was walking with purpose. Julian didn't see me at first. He was too focused on the paper. But Pierre saw me. Pierre looked up, and for the first time that night, he smiled. He placed his hand over the contract covering the signature line. Attendez, Pierre said loudly. Wait! Julian froze. What? What is wrong? Pierre looked at Julian. Then he looked out at the audience. I cannot sign this, Pierre said, his voice amplified clearly through the room. Julian laughed nervously. What do you mean? We agreed. The terms are set. The terms require the signature of the majority shareholder, Pierre said calmly. I am just the CEO, Julian. I serve at the pleasure of the board. And I cannot authorize a merger of this magnitude without the approval of the chairman of the board. Julian looked confused. Chairman, I thought you were the chairman. No, Pierre said. The chairman is the person who owns 51% of our North American operations, the person who vets every deal, the person who discovered your little discrepancies. Julian looked around wildly. Who is it bringing them out? Let us get them to sign. Pierre raised his hand and pointed a single finger. He pointed directly at the center aisle. He pointed at me. Please welcome the chairman, Pierre announced. Julian followed Pierre's finger. He saw me. He saw the white suit. He saw the look on my face. And for the first time in his miserable lying life, Julian Vance stopped smiling. The silence that descended upon the ballroom was absolute. It was not the comfortable silence of a pause in conversation, but the terrified vacuum that occurs right before a bomb detonates. Julian Vance stood frozen at the glass table, his expensive fountain pen hovering millimeters above the signature line. He looked at Pierre Dubois, his eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. The smile that had been plastered on his face for the last 3 hours began to twitch and dissolve. What do you mean you cannot sign? Julian whispered, his voice picked up by the microphone and amplified to every corner of the room. We have an agreement. The press release is already drafted. The stock market is waiting. Pierre did not look at Julian. He looked straight into the camera lens of the live stream, his expression unreadable and cold as granite. He slowly withdrew his hand from the contract and capped his own pen with a sharp, decisive click that echoed like a gunshot. I mean exactly what I said, Monsieur Vance, Pierre replied, his voice calm and authoritative. I am the CEO of Pierre Luxury Group. I run the day-to-day operations. I manage the staff. But I do not have the authority to authorize a merger of this magnitude. A deal that involves $500 million and the reputation of my firm requires the explicit written consent of the majority shareholder. Julian laughed, a high-pitched, nervous sound that made the guests shift uncomfortably in their seats. You are joking, right? Julian stammered, looking around at the crowd for support. This is a bit. Is this part of the show, Pierre? You are the face of the company. Everyone knows you run the show. Pierre shook his head slowly. I am the face, Pierre corrected him. But I am not the power. The power belongs to the chairman of the board for our North American division, the individual who holds 51% of the voting stock. And this individual is very particular about due diligence. Julian's sweat was now visible on the giant LED screens behind him. He wiped his brow with the back of his hand. Okay, fine. Julian snapped, his patience fraying. So let us get this chairman on the phone. Call him. Get him to email the approval. We are live, Pierre. We look like idiots standing here doing nothing. Pierre smiled, but it was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a predator who has finished playing with its food. There is no need to make a call, Pierre said softly. The chairman is already here. In fact, the chairman has been here all night observing your performance with great interest. Julian spun around, scanning the VIP tables in the front row. He looked at the politicians, the tech moguls, the celebrities. Who? Julian demanded. Is it Musk? Is it Bezos? Who is it? Bring him up here. Let us get this done. Pierre stepped back from the table. He raised his hand and pointed a single steady finger. He did not point at the VIP section. He did not point at the family table where my parents sat with their mouths open. He pointed to the back of the room. He pointed past the dance floor, past the ice sculptures directly into the shadows near the kitchen service doors. He pointed at me. Please, Pierre announced, his voice booming. Would the chairman of the board please step forward? Julian followed the line of Pierre's finger. He squinted against the stage lights. He saw the table. Table 45. The table for the help. He saw me sitting there. He blinked. He shook his head as if trying to clear a hallucination. Maya Julian scoffed into the microphone. Pierre, stop pointing at the help. That is just my sister-in-law. She is a secretary. Point to the real chairman. Pierre dropped his hand, but he did not look away from me. I am pointing at the real chairman, Julian. The camera operators, sensing the shift, swung their massive lenses around. The feed on the giant screen cut from Julian's sweating face to a live shot of table 45. There I was. The image was 60 feet high. Every person in the room turned in their chairs to look at the back corner. My parents stood up, knocking over their wine glasses. Ebony gasped, clutching her chest. I stood up slowly. I was wearing a beige trench coat that I had kept buttoned up to my chin for the last 2 hours. To everyone in the room, I looked like a frumpy, unstylish relative who didn't belong. I picked up my clutch. I looked at the camera lens that was zoomed in on my face. I didn't smile. I reached up and undid the top button of the coat. Then the second. Then the third. The room was silent enough to hear the fabric rustle. I shrugged the coat off my shoulders and let it drop onto the dirty floor of the service area. Underneath, I was wearing the white Italian power suit. It was tailored to within an inch of its life. The sharp lapels, the structured shoulders, the pristine fabric that caught the light. It was a suit that screamed authority. It was a suit that cost more than Julian's car. A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom. I wasn't the invisible sister anymore. I looked like a titan. I stepped out from behind the table. I didn't walk with my head down. I walked with the stride of a woman who owned the building. The crowd parted instinctively, pulling their chairs back to create a wide path for me down the center aisle. I could hear whispers erupting around me as I passed. Is that her? I thought she was a secretary? Look at her face. That is not the face of an assistant. I kept my eyes locked on the stage, locked on Julian. He looked like he had been struck by lightning. His face had gone completely gray. He gripped the edge of the glass table to keep from falling over. Maya, he whispered the microphone, picking up the tremor in his voice. What are you doing? Sit down. You are ruining the wedding. I didn't answer. I kept walking. The sound of my heels on the marble floor was a rhythmic, ominous drum beat. Click, click, click. I reached the stairs of the stage. I walked up them one by one. I stood next to Pierre. He bowed his head slightly to me, a gesture of profound respect that shocked the audience even more than my outfit. Good evening, Madame Chairman, Pierre said. Good evening, Pierre, I replied, my voice projecting clearly without a microphone. I walked over to the glass table. I stood directly in front of Julian. He looked small now. He looked terrified. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the primal fear of a man who realizes he is standing in a cage with a lion. You? Julian stammered. You are the chairman. That is impossible. You are a nobody. You fetch coffee. You translate papers. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the black titanium card he had seen at the shoe store. I dropped it on the table next to the unsigned contract. It landed with a heavy metallic thud. I am the nobody who owns 51% of the company you are begging for money, Julian. I said, my voice cool and sharp. I am the nobody who approves every acquisition. And I am the nobody who reads the fine print. I looked out at the audience, at the cameras, at the world watching on the live stream. And unfortunately for you, Julian, I said, leaning in close to the microphone so my whisper sounded like thunder, I also know how to read a balance sheet. And yours is full of lies. The glare of the stage lights felt like an interrogation lamp, but I did not blink. I stood center stage in my white suit looking down at Julian Vance, who was gripping the edge of the glass table as if it were the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth. The ballroom was deadly silent. The air was thick with the kind of tension that makes your skin prickle. Every camera was trained on us. The live stream was broadcasting this moment to millions of viewers, including the investors Julian had lied to and the regulators he had evaded. Julian's face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. He looked at Pierre, then at me, then at the stunned crowd. He lunged for the microphone stand, trying to wrestle control of the narrative. "What is this?" Julian hissed, his voice cracking. "This is a prank, right? Get off the stage, Maya. You are drunk. Security. Get her out of here." He waved his arms frantically toward the guards at the perimeter, but they did not move. Pierre had dismissed them 5 minutes ago. I reached out and calmly took the handheld microphone from the podium. I stepped into Julian's personal space, forcing him to retreat until his back was against the signed poster of himself he had displayed on an easel. "I am not drunk, Julian," I said, my voice steady and amplified through the massive speakers. "And I am not leaving." I switched languages then. I wanted him to feel the full weight of his mistake. I wanted him to remember the moment in the vineyard when he called me empty-headed. "Julian," I said in French, my accent crisp and undeniable. "I warned you about your grammar that day in the vineyard. I told you that the indicative mood was incorrect for describing reality. But today, I am not here to correct your French. I am here to correct your accounting." Julian flinched as if I had struck him. He understood the words perfectly, and he understood the threat behind them. "Stop it!" he screamed in English, sweating profusely. "Stop speaking French. No one understands you. You are just trying to show off? Cut the feed! Cut the cameras!" He turned to the AV booth in the balcony, waving his hands wildly. "Dave, cut the feed. Go to commercial, play the music." But Dave, the young technician I had paid and briefed, did not cut the feed. He was watching me, waiting for the signal. I looked up at the booth and nodded once. "Let us show the world the real numbers, Julian," I said. The giant LED screens behind us, which had been displaying Julian's face, suddenly flickered. The image changed. It was no longer a vanity shot. It was a spreadsheet. The crowd gasped. It was the internal ledger of Archon Tech. The numbers were highlighted in red. "This," I announced, pointing to the screen, "is the financial reality of the man you call a billionaire. Archon Tech has not generated a single dollar of profit in 3 years. The money you see, the cars, the parties, the private jets, it all comes from new investors." I pointed to a specific column. "See these transfers? This is a classic Ponzi scheme. Julian takes money from investor A to pay the interest for investor B, and he takes a 20% management fee off the top to buy engagement rings and rent vineyards." "Lies!" Julian shrieked, jumping up and trying to block the screen with his body. He looked like a frantic scarecrow waving his arms to hide a 60-foot image. "Those are fake. She forged them." "She is jealous," I signaled Dave again. The screen changed. "This is a letter from the French Ministry of Finance," I continued. "It details a €20 million fine for tax evasion and aggravated fraud. Julian Vance is not merging with Pierre Luxury Group to expand. He is merging to use Pierre's capital to pay his bail." My parents, sitting in the front row, were holding on to each other. My father's face was ash gray. My mother looked like she was having a stroke. They were watching their golden ticket turn into a warrant. But I wasn't done. I had one more slide, the one that mattered most to me. "Dave, next slide," I commanded. The screen changed to a high-resolution scan of a legal document. It was the grant deed for 42 Willow Creek Lane, my grandmother's cottage. Julian froze. He stopped waving his arms. He stared at the screen, his eyes bulging. This is a deed, transferring my property to Julian's holding company. I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. And at the bottom you will see a signature that purports to be mine. I walked over to Julian. I stood inches from his face. Did I sign this, Julian? I asked. He couldn't speak. He was hyperventilating. Did I sign this? I screamed, letting the anger finally break through. No, he whispered, tears streaming down his face. No, please, Maya. I can fix it. I turned back to the audience. He forged my signature, I declared. He stole the only inheritance my grandmother left me to pay for this party. He stole from his own family to feed his ego. I turned to Pierre, who was standing silently by the table watching the destruction with a grim satisfaction. Monsieur Dubois, I said formally. As the chairman of the board for North America, I have reviewed the financials. I have reviewed the legal standing of the applicant. And I have reviewed his character. I picked up the unsigned contract from the table. I veto this merger, I stated. Pierre Luxury Group will not be doing business with Archon Tech. Not today. Not ever. I ripped the contract in half. The sound of the thick paper tearing was loud in the silent room. I ripped it again and again until it was nothing but confetti. I threw the pieces into the air. They rained down on Julian like snow. And I added, looking down at the broken man before me. As the legal owner of 42 Willow Creek Lane, and as the victim of identity theft and grand larceny, I am pressing charges. Julian looked at me. He looked at the torn paper. He looked at the cameras that were zooming in on his weeping face. The reality of his situation crashed down on him. The loans, the lies, the prison time, the humiliation. It was too much. His legs gave out. He didn't stumble. He simply collapsed. He fell to his knees, then slumped forward onto the stage, sobbing into the carpet. He curled into a ball, trying to hide from the light, trying to hide from the truth. Ebony, who had been standing frozen near the cake table this entire time, finally reacted. She saw her husband on the floor. She saw the cameras turning toward her. She saw her social standing evaporating in real time. She let out a piercing scream. "My life!" She shrieked. "You ruined my life!" Then, with the dramatic flair of a soap opera star, she threw her hand to her forehead and collapsed in a heap of tulle and lace. It was a fake faint, a desperate attempt to garner sympathy, or perhaps just to escape the moment, but nobody rushed to help her. The guests were too busy filming. I stood over Julian, watching him weep. I felt no pity. I felt no regret. I looked out at the sea of shocked faces, at the flashing cameras, at the ruins of the dynasty my parents had tried to build on my back. I adjusted my white suit. I smoothed my lapel. I looked at Pierre. "I believe we are finished here," I said. Pierre nodded. "After you, Madam Chairman." I turned and walked off the stage, leaving the groom on the floor and the bride in a pile of lies, walking straight down the center aisle toward the exit, while the world watched the golden child burn and the invisible sister rise from the ashes. The sound of applause was replaced by the heavy rhythmic thud of boots hitting the marble floor. The double doors at the back of the ballroom, the ones I had just walked through, burst open again. This time, it was not a grand entrance for a billionaire or a surprise guest. It was the Federal Bureau of Investigation, flanked by officers from the Economic Crimes Unit. They moved with a synchronized precision that terrified the room more than any shout could have. Julian Vance looked up from the carpet where he was curled in a ball. His mascara, if he had been wearing any, would have been running. Instead, it was just sweat and snot streaming down his face. He saw the badges. He saw the guns on their hips. He scrambled backward, crab walking across the stage until he hit the legs of the glass table. "Get away from me!" Julian screamed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched squeal. "I have rights. You cannot touch me. I am a CEO." The lead agent walked up the stairs onto the stage. He did not look impressed. He pulled a pair of metal handcuffs from his belt. "Julian Vance, You are under arrest for wire fraud, securities fraud, tax evasion, and grand larceny. The agent stated, his voice flat and bored. Julian tried to stand up, maybe to run, maybe to fight, but two officers grabbed him by the arms. They wrenched his hands behind his back. The click of the handcuffs echoed through the silent ballroom, a sound final enough to end a marriage before it even started. As the metal bit into his wrists, Julian's survival instinct kicked in. But it was not a noble instinct. It was the instinct of a rat trying to climb over the other rats to escape the rising water. He stopped crying and started screaming. He did not scream for a lawyer. He screamed at his bride. It was her, Julian yelled, twisting his head to look at Ebony, who had miraculously recovered from her fainting spell the moment the police arrived. She was sitting up, staring at him with horror. "It is all her fault," Julian shrieked, spitting as he spoke. "She made me do it. She needed the ring. She needed the $15,000 dress. She told me to steal the house. She said her sister would never notice." Ebony scrambled to her feet, clutching her chest. "You liar!" she screamed back. "I never told you to steal anything. You told me you were rich." "She drained my accounts," Julian yelled to the agents, his eyes wild. "Look at her shoes. She is wearing stolen shoes right now. She knew the money was dirty. She did not care. Arrest her too. She is an accomplice." The crowd watched in stunned silence as the fairy tale romance disintegrated into a brawl of mutual accusations. The love of the century was nothing more than two grifters trying to outrun the consequences of their greed. While the police dragged a kicking and screaming Julian off the stage, my parents finally broke out of their shock. But they did not run to their daughter. They did not run to call a lawyer. They ran to me. Desmond and Patrice rushed down the aisle, pushing past the confused guests. They stopped at the bottom of the stairs where I was standing. My father looked up at me, his face pale, his hands shaking. "Maya," Desmond pleaded, his voice trembling. "What have you done? You have to stop them. You have to tell them it is a mistake." I looked down at him from the stage. "Stop them?" I asked. "Dad, he stole your retirement. He stole my house. He is a criminal. He is family." Patrice sobbed, grabbing my ankle. "He is your brother-in-law. You cannot let them take him away. Think about the scandal. Think about what people will say." She pointed a shaking finger at the exit where Julian was being hauled out. "You are killing your sister," Patrice wailed. "Look at her. You have destroyed her life. You did this out of spite. You did this because you are jealous. Fix it, Maya. You are the chairman, right? Use your power. Make it go away." I stared at them. Even now, with the truth projected on a 60-foot screen behind me, with the police in the room, with the fraud exposed, they were still asking me to cover for him. They were still protecting the illusion because the reality was too painful to accept. They wanted me to be the fixer. They wanted me to be the doormat one last time. I gently pulled my foot away from my mother's grasp. I crouched down so I could look them in the eye. "I did not kill anyone, Mom," I said softly. Desmond stared at me, his eyes full of accusation. "You ruined everything. You burned it all down." "No, Dad," I corrected him. "I did not start the fire. Julian did that when he forged my name." I stood up straight, smoothing the lapel of my white suit. I looked at the wreckage of the wedding. I looked at Ebony weeping on the stage, at Julian disappearing into a police van outside, at the guests whispering and pointing. "I just turned on the lights," I said, my voice cold and final. My parents looked confused. "And do you know what happens when you turn on the lights in a dirty house?" I asked. I gestured to Julian, to Ebony, to the whole rotten facade. "The roaches scatter. Roaches hate the light." I turned my back on them. I walked down the stairs, past my sobbing mother, past my stunned father. I walked down the center aisle. The guests, the elite of San Francisco, the people Julian had tried so hard to impress, were already moving. They were not rushing to help Ebony. They were not offering comfort to my parents. They were holding up their phones. They were recording the chaos. They were live streaming the downfall of the Vance empire to their own followers. As I walked past them, the sea of people parted. They looked at me with fear. They looked at me with respect. They knew now that the quiet woman in the corner was the most dangerous person in the room. I reached the double doors at the back of the ballroom. I pushed them open and stepped out into the cool night air. Behind me, the sound of my family screaming at each other faded into the background. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what was happening. The house was clean. The vermin were gone, and for the first time in my life I could breathe. The hangover from the wedding of the century was not a headache. It was a financial apocalypse. 1 week had passed since Julian was dragged off the stage in handcuffs, and the Sterling family estate was in freefall. The narrative Julian had spun was so elaborate, so fragile, that when it broke, it took everything with it. The wedding vendors, the florists, the caterers, and the venue management did not care that the groom was in federal prison. They cared about their contracts. Contracts that my father Desmond had co-signed in a fit of arrogant optimism, believing Julian would reimburse him the moment the merger closed. The bill for the cancelled reception alone was $200,000. The bank, seeing the fraud investigation on the news, had accelerated the mortgage on my parents' estate. They were not just broke, they were destitute. And Ebony, my sister, the golden child, had become a social pariah. The internet is a cruel place, and the footage of her screaming about her shoes while her husband was arrested had gone viral. She was not known as a victim. She was known as the clueless accomplice. Her brand deals evaporated overnight. Her followers turned into trolls. She was hiding in my parents' house with the curtains drawn, terrified to show her face. On Monday morning, my assistant buzzed me. "Maya, there are 3 people in the lobby asking to see you," she said, her voice hesitant. "They say they are family. They do not have an appointment, and frankly, they look a bit distressed." Should I call security? I looked out the window of my corner office. I had returned to my real job, the one Julian thought was secretarial work. I was the senior vice president of strategic negotiations. "Send them up," I said. A few minutes later, the door opened. Desmond, Patrice, and Ebony walked in. They looked like ghosts. My father's suit was wrinkled. My mother wasn't wearing makeup. Ebony was wearing oversized sunglasses and a hoodie, trying to hide. They stopped in the middle of the room, looking around at the sleek glass walls, the modern art, the view of the skyline. They had never been here. They had never cared to know where I worked. Now, seeing the reality of my success, the shame on their faces was palpable. Maya, Patrice started, her voice cracking. "Thank God you saw us. We didn't know where else to go." I didn't offer them a seat. I sat behind my desk, folding my hands. "What do you want?" I asked. Desmond stepped forward. He tried to summon his old authority, but it crumbled before he could even speak. He took a deep breath and slumped his shoulders. "We are losing the house, Maya," he said quietly. "The bank gave us 30 days. The legal fees for Julian. We tried to help him, thinking it was a misunderstanding, but the lawyers took the retainer and left when the assets were frozen. We have nothing." He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "We know you have money, Maya. We saw the card. We know you are the chairman. We are asking, no, we are begging. Please, write a check. Pay off the mortgage. Help your sister get a lawyer. We are family. You proved your point. You won. Now please have mercy." Ebony pulled down her sunglasses. Her eyes were puffy from crying. "I cannot live like this, Maya," she whined. "People are making fun of me. I need to move to a new city. I need a fresh start. Just give me enough to get an apartment in New York. I will pay you back." I looked at them. The audacity was breathtaking. After everything, the insults, the theft, the slap, the fraud, they still believed they were entitled to my labor. They still believed I existed to fix their mistakes. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a thick manila folder. I had prepared it that morning. I placed it on the desk and slid it across the glass toward them. "I will help you," I said. Desmond's face lit up. He reached for the folder with trembling hands, expecting a cashier's check. He opened it eagerly. Patrice leaned in, a smile already forming on her lips. Then they froze. It was not a check. It was a stack of paper applications. McDonald's, Wendy's, Taco Bell, a local cleaning service. And underneath those, a printout of Section 8 housing listings and budget motels on the outskirts of the city. Desmond looked up at me, his face turning red. "What is this?" he whispered. "Is this a joke?" "It is not a joke, Dad," I said calmly. "You said you needed money. That is how you get money. You work for it." I stood up and walked around the desk. "For 30 years you told me I was useless because I wasn't flashy. You told me I was boring because I worked hard. You worshipped Julian because he promised you easy wealth. Well, the easy wealth is gone." I looked at Ebony. "You want a fresh start?" "Ebony, fill out the application for the cleaning service. They are hiring. It pays $15 an hour. It is honest work. It is more than you have ever done in your life." Ebony threw the folder on the floor. "I am not scrubbing toilets," she screamed. "I am an influencer." "Not anymore," I said coldly. "Now you are just an unemployed woman with a criminal husband and no skills." Patrice began to cry. "How can you be so cruel? We are your parents. We raised you." "You raised me to be invisible." "Mom," I countered. "You raised me to be a servant to her." "Well, the servant is retired, and the bank is closed." I pressed the button on my intercom. "Jessica, please send security to my office. We have some trespassers." Desmond looked at me with pure hatred. "You will regret this, Maya. You will die alone." I smiled. It was the same smile I had worn on the stage. "I would rather be alone," I said, "than surrounded by parasites." 2 large security guards appeared at the door. "Please escort these people out," I instructed. "And make sure they do not take any of the office supplies on their way out. They have a history of stealing things that do not belong to them." The guard stepped forward. Desmond tried to protest, but he was a broken man. He let them guide him out. Patrice followed, sobbing. Ebony glared at me one last time, snatching up her sunglasses before stomping out. I watched the door close. The silence returned to the office. It was a beautiful silence. I walked to the window and looked down at the street. I saw 3 small figures walking out of the building, arguing with each other, disappearing into the gray noise of the city. I didn't feel guilty. I felt light. I had cut the anchor. 1 month later, the air in Paris smelled of roasted coffee and rain. I sat at a small outdoor table at a cafe in the Marais district, watching the Seine flow by. The nightmare of the wedding felt like a lifetime ago. Across the table, Pierre Dubois was reviewing a set of architectural plans. "The new headquarters in Lyon looks magnificent," Maya Pierre said, folding the paper. "Your input on the sustainable energy grid was brilliant. The board is very happy." "Thank you, Pierre," I said, taking a sip of my espresso. It was a good life. I was no longer hiding my success. I was living it. I had my own apartment in the 6th arrondissement. I had my grandmother's cottage back home, which I had fully restored and rented out to a nice young couple who promised to take care of the garden. My phone buzzed on the table. I glanced at the screen. It was a text from a number I didn't have saved, but I knew who it was. "Maya, please. I am at the bus station. Mom kicked me out. I have nowhere to go. I am hungry. Just send me $20. Please. I am your sister." I stared at the message. I thought about the lime green dress. I thought about the stolen shoes. I thought about the years of being told I wasn't enough. I didn't feel anger anymore. I just felt a profound sense of detachment. She was still looking for a handout. She was still refusing to save herself. I didn't reply. I didn't lecture her. I tapped the top of the screen. I selected block caller. The message disappeared. I put the phone down and looked back at Pierre. "Is everything all right?" Pierre asked. I smiled. "Yes, Pierre. Everything is perfect." I realized then that family is not defined by DNA. Family is defined by respect. It is defined by the people who see your value when you are standing in the corner in a beige dress, not just when you are wearing a power suit. I had spent my whole life trying to buy their love with my silence. But the price was too high. I took a bite of my croissant. It tasted like freedom. We walked away from that cafe an hour later, discussing the future. I didn't look back at my phone. I didn't look back at America. I walked forward into a life that was entirely, unapologetically mine. So I have a question for you. Have you ever been the invisible one in your family? Have you ever let people mistreat you because you were afraid to lose them? And if you could go back, would you stand up for yourself sooner? Let me know your story in the comments below. I read every single one. And remember, sometimes the best way to help people is to let them fall. Because only when you hit the bottom do you learn how to stand up on your own. Hit that like button if you enjoyed the story and subscribe for more. Until next time, know your worth and never let anyone translate your life for you.